Alrighty, baseball fans, welcome to another video here. We are super excited you could come join us. It is World Tournament time, and we wanted to put something together to kind of put together a little bit more about what is the World Tournament, how it came to be, and we're going to be doing this in a couple of different parts. So we're going to have one video dedicated to the original 1867 World Tournament, and then we're going to have another video released shortly thereafter to talk about the renaissance of the World Tournament and how we at the Henry Ford take care of it today. My name is Jeff Koslowski. I'm a volunteer for the Henry Ford's Historic Baseball Program, and with me again is ballist, researcher, historian, umpire, announcer, a man of many hats, Marcus Razorback Dickson. Marcus, thanks for joining me again today.
I'm excited to do it.
Cool. So World Tournament weekend, it is always a very fun time. It's always a very busy time for all of us at the Henry Ford. Sometimes very exciting, sometimes very stressful, sometimes a little bit of both. But we want to get into how this tournament came to be, because I know when I've talked to people that have either never heard of the World Tournament or they have and just never had the chance to play, one of the things they always come to me with is, but we weren't invited. How could this be the World Tournament? You don't have the entire world here. And so we want to kind of explain how that name came about, how the original tournament came about, and how this all came to be. And so, Marcus, I can't think of too many people better that I would want to do this with. So again, I appreciate you jumping on. Why don't you give me a little state of 1865, 66, 67. What does baseball look like in the mid 1860s at this point?
Well, so it was growing rapidly and moving out of the New York hub where it had primarily been. There had been certainly good teams in Philadelphia, good teams in Boston, but New York and Brooklyn were really the hubs of baseball through the 40s and definitely through the 1850s and early 1860s. The National Association of Baseball Players started having conventions, and even then they joked that it was somewhat aspirational to call it the National Association when everybody was there in New York and Brooklyn. They started having conventions in 1858. The Detroit Baseball Club actually attended the 1860 convention, and they were far and away the club from the most distant part of the country. But the Detroit Baseball Club was really trying to, they had been founded in 1858. They were really trying to focus on baseball in Michigan and to some extent baseball in the Midwest. And they attended that 1860 convention and continued to be active in some ways and came to be seen as really one of the strong clubs, the really top clubs in the Midwest. They, I think, made the unfortunate assumption that being one of the best clubs in the Midwest meant that they were one of the best clubs in the country, which ended up becoming pretty clearly not the case. But by the time we got to 1867, huge explosion in baseball in Michigan, over 250 clubs founded in Michigan alone that year. And the Detroit club wanted to do a tournament to bring the best clubs. So they sent out an invitation to the big clubs in New York and Philadelphia, the Gothams, the Mutuals, the Eckfords, the Excelsior, the Olympics. They invited all of these clubs to come out to this tournament in Detroit because they really wanted to put Detroit baseball and Midwest baseball on the map. You would already see a little bit of that in Henry Chadwick's Ball Players Chronicle, where they would highlight different baseball being played in different parts of the country, but clearly it was still New York, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, a little bit Boston focused.
So we got a very East Coast game, and I know I've read some of those accounts, and one of the things that I always remember at the winter meetings is that when there was a team from anywhere west of the Mississippi, when they eventually arrived, they would come with a round of applause and everybody's cheering for them about like, yeah, this is our game and it's growing. See, here's this team from Cincinnati. Here's this team from Detroit, even further west than that. But, we also noticed like baseball, it's growing. The rules are getting, the rules are changing, the rules are evolving. The game is getting tougher. It's starting to evolve away from its roots of, a children's game. And now it's becoming something that adults want to do and want to be good at. And so naturally, as adults, we want to determine who's the best. So is there a way that champions are crowned or determined?
Yeah, if you read Haney's Baseball Book of Reference, 1867, we'll talk about that a little bit more, I'm sure. But Haney's is very clear that there is, in 1867, there is no mechanism for determining a national champion. That there's not a way to do that, and then it says no, there's no way to do that. Then it kind of goes on and says, if you want to know who the champion is, so it goes a little bit in that direction. And essentially, think about boxing. How do you become the champion boxer? By beating the existing champion boxer. And so that was a lot of the way baseball champions were, at least informally, established. Whoever was seen as the champion club, when they were beaten in a 3-game match by somebody else in a single season, that person, or that club rather, claimed the title of champion club. And so there were a lot of controversy around that. A couple of years later, when the Cincinnati Red Stockings were far and away the best club in the country, they couldn't get a match against the New York champions scheduled, and so they were never called the champions, even though they were undefeated. But in 1867, that was the norm. You had to you became champion by beating the existing champion. Just a brief story about the 1867 champions, the Union Club of Morrisania. They essentially beat the current champions to claim that champion pennant, and then sort of refused to play anybody else for the last part of the season to make sure that they held on to it. So there was a little bit of controversy around the Unions of Morrisania being the 1867 champions, but that's how it was played out. Tournaments, however, allowed people to claim some form of recognition and laurels.
Okay, so like I said, it's loose. There's a way, there's some ideas, but there isn't anything definitive. There's nothing that says this is exactly how we're not like a World Series of 2024 where there's no doubt about it. This team is the best. So what is Detroit trying to do, and what do we know about kind of Detroit's mentality as far as this issue of a champion?
Well, it's really interesting that the idea of Detroit being seen as the champion club isn't part of this at all. Because unlike today, the Henry Ford Greenfield Village, we host the World Tournament. Akron hosts the Akron Cup. And for all those tournaments, the host club plays in the tournament. But in 1867, that wasn't the case. The Detroit Baseball Club hosted the tournament, but they did not participate. The point of the tournament there was to bring baseball to the Midwest, to let other people from the East see baseball in the Midwest. And then what was scheduled at the end of the tournament was that the Detroit club would play a friendly game against whoever the victors of the tournament were. And so there's a little bit of, I think, expectation among the Detroit club that they would be a tournament victor who the Detroit club would play and then beat in a friendly match. It didn't work out that way, but they were very clearly the hosts. They were not competing in the tournament. They were, if you host a dinner party, you are bringing people together for their benefit and their enjoyment, and that's what was happening here.
So for those of us who are local or maybe coming to the Detroit area for the first time, do we know roughly or exactly where this tournament would have been held?
So the newspaper accounts talk about it being at the terminus of the Woodward Avenue line. So that was the kind of the horse trolley line. And the terminus of the Woodward Avenue line in 1867 was at Woodward and Alexandrine. And so if you are local, think about where Garden Bowl, the Magic Stick, right there at Alexandrine, that's where that terminus is. And so it's just very close to Harper Hospital, the DMC hospitals there. And in fact, if you go to that DMC campus, there's a plaque that recognizes that Recreation Park, which is where the professional Detroit Wolverines played in the 1880s, that park was there. And so that area, which was part of the old Cass Ribbon Farm, was where a lot of baseball was played at this point in Detroit history. So right there around Woodward and Alexandrine.
Okay. All right. So it's happening. The Detroit Baseball Club is establishing. We're hosting this. We're doing this. We're going to have this tournament. We're going to send out invitations to all the best teams. All these great teams are going to come in. We're going to solve once and for all the situation. How does the tournament end up going? Give me the highlights. Give me the logistics. How did the 1867 tournament actually go?
So the first thing is that it got a lot of national press initially. And there's sort of an interesting back and forth that is in Peter Morris's book, Baseball Fever, from I believe the Buffalo newspaper, where they said, "Oh, we're really excited about this tournament being held in Detroit, and we hope that our boys will go. We think that we'll be able to really take it to them and show them, Buffalo baseball." And the Detroit papers reprinted that letter with an editorial note that said, "Many have thought so," sort of saying, "Oh yeah, you think you can beat us, but that's not going to happen." What ended up happening was that there were invitations sent to specific clubs, like the Gothams, the Mutuals, the big New York, Brooklyn, Philadelphia clubs. None of them came. And the rest of it was clubs would, for the most part, it was, here's a tournament, who wants to be in it? And so clubs sent in their registrations. So anybody could choose to be in it. There were 3 classes, A, B, and C, or first class, second class, and third class. And one of the controversies was that clubs declared what class they were. And there was certainly some controversy where clubs that were made up of men who were like 24-ish, 25-ish for the most part, declared themselves to be a third-class club where they were playing 17, 18, 19-year-olds. So there was a little bit of controversy around that. But there were the three classes. They decided to only play on one field, and that they would play full 9-inning games. So they got 3 or 4 games in a day. The tournament took a week. It was a single elimination tournament. So people would travel from however far away they had traveled, play one game, get beaten, sometimes beaten badly, and they were done. But over 20 clubs came in and participated, and it was certainly a big event. The Detroit Free Press and other papers, but the Free Press covered the tournament, and they gave a full batter-by-batter account of at least one game each day. So in terms of looking at the tournament, in terms of how it played out and what was the quality of play, that's such a valuable resource to be able to go through batter by batter and see exactly what was happening and how the game was being played.
So we've got 3 classes. I remember that third class, I think, was you touched on it here, that teams could basically say what class they are in. And so I think I remember the third class ended as like a 39-1 win for this club after 5 innings. And everybody just went, okay. This is going on long enough here. So we've got 3 classes. what about that first class winner? Because that's everything we think about today is who's the first class winner. Who is our first class winner?
So this was some controversy. They were called the Unknown Baseball Club of Jackson, Michigan. And there's a lot of at the time there were some hard feelings around this club. Today in vintage baseball, it's not at all uncommon that a player will play for one team today, but then they just love to play, so they might be a member of 2 or 3 different clubs. Or if somebody is short a player, they'll just pick up somebody from another club, and we don't worry about that. We can think of people who played for lots of different clubs. That was absolutely not the case in 1867. The rules were very clear. You had to be a member of one club and have played for no other for 30 days prior to a game in order to be eligible to play, to be able to play in a match game, a real game with that club. And there were lots of examples of charges filed with the National Association of Baseball Players Judicial Committee saying, hey, we lost that game, but they were playing somebody who wasn't eligible. I mean, it was a big deal. So Jackson was accused, the Unknowns were accused of not being a real baseball club. Jackson had 4 baseball clubs, and they were accused of being what was called a scraped nine, or which was they were going to pick players from each of these other clubs to create a club to go to compete in that tournament. They weren't seen as a club that had existed for 30 days, that the people had not played for any other club for 30 days. And so there was some controversy there. They ended up going through and winning the tournament. And the newspapers were not necessarily as objective always as we might hope, but it was reported that when the captain of Jackson went forward at the final banquet to receive the honors of having won, that while all the other award recipients had been greeted with applause, he was greeted with silence. Now, that's from a Detroit newspaper, so maybe there's a little bit of bias there. But some of the bad blood was that the Detroit papers were criticizing Jackson. The Jackson papers were pointing out that 2 years earlier, in 1865, when there had been the first state of Michigan championship, which Detroit Baseball Club won, that Detroit mysteriously had a player from New York. And there was real complaint about whether they had brought in a professional, someone who was paid under the table in some way to help them win that state of Michigan championship. So Jackson's point was, you did this in 1865 and you're complaining about us in some way in 1867. So that went back and forth for a while. The Unknowns did continue to play for a couple of years, and they did quite well. But yeah, there was certainly some controversy. But yeah, the final was the Unions of Jackson 29, the Alleghenies of Pittsburgh 26. Because of that bad blood, the Detroits and the Unknowns did not play that final friendly game. Instead, the Detroit club played the Alleghenies and lost.
So, oh man, bummer. So do you think this tournament actually solved what it was trying to do?
No. That it was intended to be a big national audience, right? It was going to really bring attention to baseball in the Midwest, to help people understand about the quality of baseball in the Midwest. Instead, the world's tournament was Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Ontario. So it was a very regional draw. It was never the national draw that they had hoped for. And then the other piece of it was that the tournament had cash prizes and $300 in greenbacks to the winner of the first class. Well, the rules about professionalism, think about the Olympics and what exactly, back when it was really around amateurism, what was okay and what was not, that was really finessed in a lot of ways. And so it was perfectly okay to give an object that was valuable. There were prizes like tea sets and opera glasses and other kind of things. But to give money was seen as a violation of the rules that forbade paying players to play baseball. And so in the national press, like Henry Chadwick's Ball Players Chronicle, the week that should have been reporting on the World Tournament, it had one report about baseball in Michigan. There was a minor game in Kalamazoo. And then it had a note that said, "Don't pay for baseball, boys." And it essentially said that they refused to cover the tournament because of the cash prizes that were awarded. And so it didn't bring in the people that they hoped to bring in, and it didn't get the publicity that they hoped it would get. And just coincidentally, at the same time, the National Baseball Club of Washington, D.C. was touring through the Midwest, beating almost everybody by 50, 60 runs. They lost one game in a somewhat controversial game, but they were winning 110-4 or something, scores like that. So if it was intended to show the quality of Midwest ball, the National Club demystified that, and the World Tournament didn't bring that attention. So really sadly, I think the main thing it did was it led to Greenfield Village holding the tournament 150 years later.
So based on that, I bet it would be probably pretty safe to say that there wasn't a World Tournament of Baseball of 1868. Was that ever discussed? Was that ever thought of?
No. Well, whether it was discussed or not, I don't know. But it certainly was never advertised. It was never promoted. There wasn't a tournament like that. I think that people felt that it was a good tournament, that it was, people enjoyed it. It brought a lot of money into the city. Hotels were full, restaurants were full. So it did all of those things. People were glad they had done it. Good relationships were formed, all those things. But reputationally, it didn't achieve the goals. But yeah, I think it was seen as an awful lot of effort. And remember, it was in 1869. The rules were slightly changed in 68 to allow tinkering around professionalism. 69 really allowed professional baseball. 71 was the first professional league. The idea of a grand amateur tournament, 67 was getting close to the last time you really were going to do that. So the world of baseball was changing, that made it less appealing.
So we'll kind of walk it back here. We'll finish up with how should we look at that 1867 tournament as amateur historians, as professional baseball historians? What legacy does this tournament have?
It's beneficial for those of us who play baseball today and play vintage baseball today, because it does give us, there are really good records around how the games were played, what the scores were. I talk about often at our games, what was the average number of runs scored by both teams combined in a game? 76. It was a high scoring event, which gives us an idea of how baseball was being played in the Midwest. If you look at New York, those really high scores had begun to fall away a bit in New York by then, suggesting again around the quality of play between the two areas. So there was that. There were some unexpected sidelines. When the tournament in 1867 was very clear that they were relying on Haney's Baseball Book of Reference. And when Greenfield Village decided to recreate the tournament, they acquired a copy of Haney's and worked with a publisher to have that reproduced. And so that's why Haney's for 1867 is widely available as a resource guide, a reference book for vintage baseball players today. And that was really the first book that included things like how to be a captain, how to practice, how to put your players in the lineup order, how to be an umpire, what the most important qualifications are for an umpire, how to play baseball on the ice. All of these different things that were in Haney's that we now have because we went back to get that specific book, which was the bigger reference book of the day. So there was that. The Detroit Club, that was a little bit their big hurrah. They continued to play for sure, but they weren't as good. They weren't as dominant. So it was kind of the finale of the fireworks show.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of hard as the Detroit Baseball Club. I remember reading that it's hard to talk about how good your area is, and then they end up losing a game to, God forbid, a bunch of students from the University of Michigan.
Right.
It's it's hard to say we're this great area, and then you lose to people whose job it is to just be kids and learn and all that. So, well, so Marcus, I appreciate this section of the video here. We're gonna release we'll be releasing this and then be coming back with the second half, which is how does the World Tournament affect kind of in the modern sense, really the rebirth of this tournament here. So Marcus, really appreciate your time, my man. Thanks for sharing with us.
All right.
So everybody, stay tuned. We'll come up with our second video here on World Tournament Weekend. See y'all later.